Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to welcome you to the first of our business support webinars for 2025, Consumer Duty and the Vulnerable Customers. I'm Vicky Barrett. I'm the Prime Partner Segment Manager for Allianz in the UK. And before we get started today, I just wanted to go over a few items just so you know how to participate in this event. You have joined the presentation using your computer, speaker, audio, but if you would prefer to dial in using the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and dial information will be displayed that you can use to call into the webinar. You will have the opportunity, and we welcome you to submit text questions today for the presenter to answer. You should see in the bottom right hand corner there's a chat box, and you can submit your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will then collate these and address them at the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. And like I said, really do encourage you to ask any questions and interact with the presenter today. So on that note, I will pass over to Kerris from Sing 365, who's going to deliver today's webinar. Thank you.
Brilliant, and thank you, Vicky, and good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, even. There we go, not off to the best start. Thank you for having me. As Vicky kindly introduced, we are going over vulnerable customers and the consumer duty today. So let's first start off with our course objectives. So by the end of this 1 hour webinar, you will have gained a clear understanding of the duty, the consumer duty, its principles, and how they impact the treatment of vulnerable customers. You're going to learn some practical methods to recognize vulnerability and implement tailored support strategies to meet individual customer needs. Also be able to develop some effective communication techniques that ensure clarity, transparency, and accessibility for all of our customers, particularly, of course, through that lens of those in vulnerable circumstances or situations, and you'll acquire actionable steps to ensure compliance with those regulatory standards, focusing, of course, on that improving of customer outcomes, getting those good customer outcomes, and also that improved service delivery. So we're starting off the session by giving ourselves a bit of a refresher on the duty itself. So looking at the consumer duty, first off, sort of a bit of context as to where it came from. So the FCA are, of course, as the regulator, focused on raising standards and prioritising customer needs. Now, their strategy emphasises fostering healthy, successful financial services markets, where consumers are offered products and services that are clear, they're suitable, and they provide them value for money. So essentially, aims to ensure that all products and services are understandable, they meet their customers' needs, and are also cost effective and affordable. But they found in a thematic review prior to the implementation of the duty, so 21-22 time, that actually the existing rules around treatment of customers, so our TCF principles, the treating customers fairly principles that had been introduced and been in place since 2007, that although they did set a really good and important foundation for our treatment of customers in the whole of the financial services, they had become quite outdated. And that was due to financial markets changing, adapting, becoming more complex, new products being introduced to the markets. Think of all the technological advancement that we've had in that period. And also the needs of customers had also changed. Those requirements had also become a bit more complex. So we needed something, or the regulator decided that we needed a new approach. So on the 31st of July 2023, which feels like it was ages ago, but in reality not that long, the FCA introduced their significant new principle, that Principle 12, which is, of course, the consumer duty, mandating that all firms have to act to deliver good outcomes for their retail customers. Now, this marked a decisive shift for the regulator. They're increasingly moving away from more principle-based regulation to more outcome-based expectation and regulation. And that's why we've got the 4 outcomes that have to be evidenced as being achieved under the consumer duty. It's all about emphasizing that overall consumer outcomes. So looking at that more, essentially, better protected, more consumer friendly practices. And to reinforce that 12th principle, they also introduced that new code of conduct rule. So COCOM Rule 6, giving that increased accountability, so reinforcing this principle. Now, that means that individuals are now accountable for delivering good outcomes to retail customers. So not just the firm overall, it's also the people operating, carrying out regulated activity within the firm as well. So it puts the onus on the individual as well to make sure we're achieving those good outcomes. So carrying on with our refresher for the consumer duty, as part of this, firms are required to comply with the 3 cross-cutting rules. So that's acting in good faith towards retail customers, avoiding foreseeable harms, and also enabling and supporting those customers in pursuing their financial objectives. So this demands a really proactive approach from firms in actually delivering those good customer outcomes. And to achieve this, firms need to make sure that they've got the right culture and they've got the right governance in place to meet those expectations. Now, we touched on those 4 consumer outcomes. These are the measures, excuse me, these are the measures that firms need to evidence to show how successful they have been in implementing the duty. So they set some clear standards that, again, all financial service businesses must demonstrate they have achieved and are achieving. So they focus on ensuring those customers are offered suitable products and services, and also supported by clear communication and accessible customer service. So, of course, those 4 consumer outcomes, they have replaced for retail customers the previous 6 TCF, so the treating customers fairly outcomes. They, of course, do still apply to those non-retail clients, which is typically sort of reinsurance clients and also those larger commercial clients with large contracts of risk. Although it is worth noting there is going to be a review on commercial clients being sort of pulled in to that definition of retail customer. So watch this space. Now we're just going to do a really quick sort of overview of what those outcomes actually are. What is it that firms are supposed to be achieving? And then what we're going to do is look at this from that lens of the vulnerable clients. So our first outcome is the products and services. So this sort of is reflective of PROD in the FCA handbook. That's the product governance rules. These require insurers to ensure that all retail products are fit for purpose. They meet the needs, characteristics, and objectives of the target market. And that includes any vulnerable clients that are in scope of that target market. And this is so that the customer can actually achieve their financial objectives and avoid harm, because they can only do this when the products that are designed for them and distributed with those goals in mind. So this is where we have to have those annual reviews, annually assessing the products. It isn't a one and done exercise. Have to continuously, insurers in particular, those manufacturers of products, have to continuously ensure that those products still meet the needs of the target market. But also the distribution strategy has to also align with the target market. And that could be that, say, a product in particular may actually require an advised sale, or it could be it has to have intermediary involvement. Now, it's not all on the insurer. Intermediaries as distributors, so including brokers, also have requirements here as well, having to manage conflicts of interest and avoid foreseeable harm to customers. So ensuring that their services are still supporting those good outcomes. And that is at every single point of the customer journey in relation to those products and services. Our second outcome, then, just to do again a quick refresher, a quick recap on this one, is our price and value. Now, price and value is an evergreen topic for the industry and for the regulator. Now, the reason it's one of the outcomes is because retail customers face harm when they don't receive value for their money, and it undermines their financial objectives. And firms cannot be seen as acting in good faith if they knowingly produce or distribute poor value products or services. Now, to actually understand what fair value is, that hinges on whether the price paid is actually reasonable relative to the product's benefits. Now, for insurance in particular, the value of a policy is often intangible. So policyholders hope generally to never actually have to use their policy. It is there for peace of mind in case something essentially goes wrong. They've got that safety net. That's what insurance is designed for. But the FCA have been very clear saying that that cannot be used, that peace of mind cannot be used to dictate whether a product is value or not. It's all about the nature, the benefits, the limitations, total customer costs as well. So, of course, as part of this, we've got our fair value assessments. Again, not a one and done exercise, conducted every year, and they have to be shared again from the insurer to the distributor. And of course, brokers also have to make sure that any of their additional charges, such as their fees, remuneration, do not compromise the value of that product, because unfair fees like excessive premium finance charges are going to be seen as invalidating that product's actual fair value. And of course, we know this as well is high up on the regulator's agenda at the moment. There's a lot of regulatory focus on price in particular. The FCA has launched a couple of initiatives looking into, say, the pricing of motor products, to try and tackle those rising prices. And also there's a lot of focus on premium finance as well, sort of examining whether competitive terms are actually being supplied, if there is a need for increased transparency all around this value space. So very, very high on the regulator's agenda, of course, and comes in as one of those consumer outcomes. So getting into the final two, then we've got our outcome 3. Now, this is one that is of particular relevance when we're thinking about our vulnerable clients, not to say that the other two aren't, but really getting into sort of the nitty gritty here, because a key risk in the whole of financial services, including insurance, is that there is a general lack of understanding and quite low financial literacy among the UK population, so including with UK adults. So of course that's then reflective of your pool of customers, and that does include commercial clients as well. So this is why there's that push for ensuring that all communications are clear, they are not misleading throughout the customer journey, throughout the sales journey, post-sales documents. All of that information is actually providing accurate and clear information. As we know, this is to ensure that each customer can make an informed decision. And this is why we need to make sure they fully understand the information that is supplied to them. So actually know what it is they're purchasing, including those sort of onerous terms and conditions, in order to help them avoid a foreseeable harm of a dispute during a claim. Now, a major part of thinking about vulnerable clients and also this particular consumer duty outcome is making sure that we understand the information needs of our customer to ensure that we can fulfill them, so that we can tailor our communications to make sure that they can make that informed decision. So this means being flexible. It means adjusting our approach based on those varying levels of expertise, knowledge, understanding, financial literacy. So that's why it's so important to be prioritizing that clarity and that comprehension. And what this helps us to do, which is something that the regulator found was occurring prior to the consumer duty coming into play, was that there was exploitation happening due to the information gaps. So, of course, as the broker or as the insurer, you've got the information, you understand that product. If the individual doesn't, there can be cases of misconduct where that is taken advantage of. And so this is put in place to absolutely stop that from happening, making sure there is a provision of timely and relevant information throughout the sales process, assuming not making assumptions that customers understand more than they do. So one of the best things to do is actually treat every single potential or existing customer as if they are a lay person, and then you can get a better understanding of what their actual understanding, their financial capability, literacy levels actually are, and then you can sort of build from that as to what information it is you need to share, how you need to communicate that. And it's just to ensure that there isn't that exploitation of that information gap, because that can sometimes as well happen absolutely unwittingly, so not being done on purpose. But if we're not given the right information, then a customer is unable to make an informed decision. And that's for all customers. Again, it's not just those with characteristics of vulnerability. And finally, our outcome number 4. So this is, of course, the emphasis on our customer support. This is pre, during, and after sales. This is how we support onboarding customers, potential policyholders, existing customers, and also those customers that are wanting or choosing to leave. So absolutely all of them. And again, it comes back to that pursuit of financial objectives. A customer can only do that effectively where they're getting the right support in how to be using the products and services that they've bought, also being able to communicate effectively and contact the firm that they're dealing with. So firms are expected to provide support that meets their customers' needs. Again, this pulls in our customers with characteristics of vulnerability. It means customers not facing any unreasonable barriers or sludge practices. And what we mean by that is that there have been cases where it's been found that it's purposely made difficult to make a complaint, or it's purposely made difficult for an existing client to be able to contact a firm. So those sludge practices, they just make it harder to do so. And the general reason for that is to make it so the person effectively gives up. Now, luckily, that isn't sort of a systematic problem, but it is something that had been occurring. So we need to make sure there's not any unreasonable barriers, again, whether that is sort of unwittingly happening as well. So actually being able to contact the firm, contact the broker, be able to actually ask the questions, get the support that is required is absolutely essential to achieving that outcome number 3, at 4 even. So we've sort of pulled in those customers in vulnerable circumstances a little bit as we've gone through so far. For the rest of the session, we're going to focus on that specifically, and we're going to have sort of the consumer duty permeating throughout. And that is because there is, of course, innate links between consumer duty and the supporting of our vulnerable clients and customers. So the FCA emphasised when the duty was being put together that all vulnerable clients must achieve at least the same quality, the same good outcomes as all other retail customers. Now, there is a lot of focus put on vulnerable clients. There has been for a number of years. This is because those individuals typically are understood as having additional needs, so a need for more support than your average customer, and they face heightened risks. And the consumer duty mandates that we need to be prioritising those needs, making sure that we're understanding that, making sure we're putting things in place to protect those individuals against those, say, foreseeable harms. So the Consumer Duty is all about raising those care standards for all customers, but it does align with the FCA's guidance on fair treatment of vulnerable customers, which of course is in the document FG21/1, which we all need to make sure we are familiar with. That guidance helps to outline those specific actions we should be taking to ensure those equitable outcomes for our vulnerable clients, while also, again, preventing that foreseeable harm. Now, this again is an evergreen topic for the regulator, something that is always sort of front of mind when they're thinking about that consumer protection, part of their objectives, their strategy. And there is actually some work sort of scheduled to review some of the vulnerable client guidance that will be happening this year. So there's possibility for amends there. But there is also sort of heightened focus in this area. And this is underscored by some recent quite hefty enforcement actions that have taken place against a number of firms. A lot of this is in relation to the cost of living crisis, the ongoing economic uncertainty, which doesn't seem to be getting any more certain if you're keeping on top of the news currently. But just an example of that, in September last year, the FCA fined a bank in the UK £10.9 million for unfairly treating customers who were in arrears, therefore vulnerable, and failing to ensure that they achieved good outcomes. They were also having to pay redress of around £99 million for all of those individuals affected. So just highlighting the FCA's commitment to ensuring that vulnerable clients are receiving the protection and outcomes that they should be getting, and firms are absolutely being held accountable for falling short of these standards, and that is only going to continue. It's also worth noting that the FCA have a review of the whole of the Consumer Duty scheduled for 2026. So they're going to be putting a lot of focus on sort of what outcomes are actually being achieved across the whole of the financial services, but they will of course do that cross-sectoral analysis. So again, a lot of focus in this area. We're probably going to see quite a bit more enforcement actions from those that are not necessarily getting it right. So, as I said, for the remainder of this session, looking more then at sort of the vulnerable customers, let's get an understanding of what we mean by this. How can we make sure we're being compliant with the regulation? And most importantly, how can we make sure we're effectively supporting our clients that may have characteristics of vulnerability? Now, the FCA give us a definition of what they consider to be a vulnerable customer, and it's someone who, due to their personal circumstances, their situation, are more susceptible to harm. And that is particularly when a firm is failing to act with the appropriate levels of care. So all of their research and study in this area has found that firms not adequately supporting a vulnerable customer can absolutely make their situation worse. So this is why we need to make sure that we are protecting those individuals as best we can, supporting them as best we can. So all customers may experience vulnerability at some point. This was massively highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns, where individuals were all of a sudden found themselves in sort of with redundancies or lack of their income, lack of financial stability, really highlighted how sort of quickly and easy we can fall into the characteristics of vulnerability. Now, what is worth noting, and it's always worth noting up top, is that not everybody that would be considered to fall into the definition of a vulnerable client for our purposes in the financial services would actually say that they were themselves. They may not say or consider themselves to be one. So it is important to make sure that we understand that definition so we know who is falling into that realm of requiring some more protection from us, because they could potentially be more likely to suffer from increased harm. Now, that doesn't mean that every single vulnerable customer will experience that increased harm. It just increases the risk of it happening. Now, this means that we need to understand those harms that our customers may face. We need to ensure that fair treatment for those in those vulnerable circumstances. And that commitment has to be through the entire customer journey. And that is from our product and service design, and that is then through to customer engagement, communication, and support. And as I said before, during and after sales, making sure that that is being considered through out. And it is really important to note that vulnerability isn't something that is linear. It can be temporary, it can be sporadic, or it can absolutely be permanent. But what that means is that our approach to how we support those customers means it has to be flexible. It has to be tailored towards individuals to meet their diverse needs effectively. So, absolutely, a blanket one size fits all vulnerable clients isn't how it works at all. We need to be really having a flexible, adjustable, adaptable approach. So, just thinking about stats then, the FCA carry out something called the Financial Lives Report. They do this quite regularly. They've got they closed submissions for the 2024 report. That's sort of being analysed. We'll hear about that shortly, I'm sure. So the last data that we actually have from them for a full financial report is still from 2022. So this is based on the latest data that we have available. But that report found that over half of UK adults, so 52%, have characteristics of vulnerability. And I personally would be shocked if that number hasn't risen in the latest report. And that is just due to the ongoing financial uncertainty, cost of living crisis that is occurring. So thinking of that then in relation to our clients, we should be thinking of it as around half of our clients then, unless we're in, say, a specialist area, a niche area of insurance, where all of our target market may be. But in general, there could be over half of our customers could fall into those of having characteristics of vulnerability. Now, the FCA's work in this, they've found that there are 4 drivers, what they call drivers for vulnerability. So the main things that sort of cause a vulnerable client, that includes health. So of course that is physical and also mental health. That does include things like the battling of addiction, life events. So that is predominantly focuses on negative events. So bereavement, redundancy, relationship breakdown, and divorce, for example. These can put a person into a position of vulnerability. It can also include things like being the victim of a crime, say a robbery that's actually resulting in a claim. That would also fall into that sort of negative life event. And it also includes those sort of positive events that also have a lot of stress attached to them as well. So things like getting married, things like being pregnant, for example, having a child, that can exacerbate stress as well, and that can increase vulnerability. We've also got resilience. So this is a client's ability to cope with unexpected, either financial or emotional situations. Now, from the financial point of view, that is somebody that is, say, on a lower income, or a person that has absolutely no savings. They may be less resilient, or will very likely be less resilient to any sort of financial shock. So don't have a safety net of savings to fall back on, for example. And we are seeing, unfortunately, that increasing, again, due to the economic situation that we find ourselves in, both in the UK and sort of ongoing globally at the moment. And then finally there we've got capability. So that is around predominantly, again, financial capability, but it pulls in that level of understanding. That these are individuals that have less understanding, or maybe even just confidence in understanding financial literacy, in making a financial decision, so may find the assessment of products and services and the information provided about them quite difficult to process. It could be that the processes are absolutely unfamiliar, the information is difficult to understand. Now, this also includes a lack of digital know-how, which is incredibly important to be thinking about as we're moving more and more to those sort of digital based quotations, processings. The use of AI is getting more and more in financial services and also within the insurance. If we think about those chatbots that are becoming the first point of call for a lot of firms, actually having to think about how are they a hindrance? Are they actually a help if we're thinking about our vulnerable clients? So having to think about that digital know-how of the clients that we have. Low literacy skills also come into play here, and just that, as I said, that general lack of knowledge. Having English as not the first language as well can be pulled into here, particularly if we're thinking about jargon. The terms that we utilize may not be as understandable for somebody where their first language is not English. Now, again, in that latest data that we've got for the full financial life survey, just to give some sort of statistics and numerical backup of these particular drivers, they found that 9% of the UK population, 4.8 million adults at the time, were believed to be in poor health or had a serious illness, such as cancer or multiple sclerosis. They found that 22%, 11.4 million adults, had experienced a negative life event, including bereavement, job loss, relationship breakdown, and also, unfortunately, financial or economic abuse. 27% of the UK adult population, that's 14.5 million adults, were considered to have low resilience. So again, reporting that they were finding it very difficult to recover from negative experiences. A number of that figure, it was actually found, if you look at the report, that they actually wouldn't be able to financially survive a week if they lost their job today. So very, very low financial resilience. And then 22% again, this time the figure around more 11.7 million, found that adults found to have what's considered a low financial capability. So having challenges in those areas of understanding sort of financial literacy, as well as things like language proficiency, digital skills, and also learning difficulties. So again, we can see significant percentages of who could also be in our customer base. And as I said as well, with the new report sort of being should be coming out this year, it will be interesting to see where those figures are. As I said, personally, I would be shocked if there hasn't been numbers going up in a number of those areas, just due to the ongoing sort of cost of living crisis, as it were. Unfortunately, that we're not seeing the back end of any time soon, it feels like. Now, what we're going to look at now, just shifting the lens again, we've got a bit of a better understanding of what who would fall into those sort of requirements for those vulnerable characteristic requirements, what the FCA have to say. We've also had that refresher on the consumer duty. So I just want to look at some practical steps for actually supporting our vulnerable clients and thinking about how that can be done compliantly in light of the vulnerable customer guidance and how this aligns with the consumer duty. And this information has come from actually a review that was conducted last year, ready for the year anniversary of the implementation of the duty. So it was on 31st of July 2024, looking at some of those areas where businesses have been found to have good practice in relation to implementing the duty and protecting vulnerable clients in particular. So although that product design is predominantly sort of focused for manufacturers, so that's our insurers, of course, as brokers still need to be aware of what this process is, have an understanding of what those products are to make sure that we're getting the most suitable products to our clients. So good practice, involving vulnerable consumers in that development, engaging those vulnerable clients in all stages of product and service design. So this is typically things that are done through the conducting of focus groups to identify sort of challenges within the target market for those particular products. So that could be through the increased use of digital platforms as well from firms, getting an understanding of what the challenges could be around that. Also, the conducting of impact assessments. So actually evaluating both the positive and negative impacts on vulnerable groups. So that could be, for example, assessing how product terms could actually affect a customer with limited or no mobility. So such as a home insurance product actually requiring in-person claims inspections, things of that nature. So just looking at how they could be tailored to better suit an individual. Of course, big part of the duty, that prevention of harm. So making sure those products and services actually actively minimize that harm for vulnerable customers. So this could be developing further fraud protection features, say for example for elderly customers who unfortunately are more likely to be targeted and also susceptible to scams. So through the incorporation of tailored features such as a movement towards selfie-based identity verification, that's something that's been put in place to better protect against certain vulnerable groups, particularly elder customers, to simplify those processes for them while still preventing that risk of fraud. And it's just making sure that those products and services, again, they're designed with those vulnerable clients in mind. And what that actually does is it improves the process for all customers, because it's actually thinking about all of those sort of requirements. And you actually find when you put these things in place that actually all customers end up being more satisfied. Now, of course, customer service has to come in play here. Customer support is one of the 4 outcomes. So again, good practice for being compliant with the duty and the guidance, making sure systems are in place that are developed to sort of encourage and also handle the disclosure of vulnerable customer needs. Now, as I said, there are a number of people that fall into the definition of a vulnerable client that will not identify themselves as much. So you're very unlikely for somebody to tell you, I'm a vulnerable customer. Instead, it's having processes in place that actually just enable that to happen. That can be as simple as having all customer facing staff trained to ask open-ended questions to help to identify any sort of signs of vulnerability. And this can be as simple as asking for what communication preferences are. It can open the door for somebody to say, I actually need large print text, please. It's also the adapting of services, so customizing our customer service approaches with vulnerable clients in mind. Now, larger firms, we're seeing them assign dedicated teams for customers in vulnerable circumstances to say guide them through claims, for example, but also smaller firms having, say, a vulnerable customer champion, so somebody who has that specialist training to be better able to sort of further support that individual, and also communicating that that's something that the business offers goes a long way. That proactively informing customers of available assistance. And again, that can be as simple as having, say, a brochure or some sort of communication that explains what is there to assist a vulnerable client. And again, that could be we offer all of our communications in a larger font, or we have Braille, or we offer audio versions of all of our communications. Again, it opens the door for that person to be able to say, oh, that's the best for me, please, and being able to access that. Also includes having those systems in place to adequately record the needs of a customer. So this is particularly important, again, if, say, they flag that they have a certain requirement, making sure that there's somewhere that makes a note of this. Again, not diagnosing anybody, being very careful with what we put into the customer's file, as remembering that they can have a subject access request and they may not identify themselves as a vulnerable client to see language like that in their file may be quite distressing. So instead, just having those things that just make the process easier, ensure that, say, again, that customer that actually needs larger font, larger print documents, anybody else that goes in that client's file is able to know that if there is anything that needs printing or sending, it needs to be of that larger font. So making sure at renewals and MTAs, for example, the policy documents they get are the larger print documents. So it creates that seamless process. And also it ensures that that customer doesn't have to struggle if they get the smaller text again, which could again lead to them not being able to make an informed decision or fully knowing the cover, and also uh, means that they may have to contact you and say that again. It's not reflective of good service in general. And also that training of staff comes into play as well. So you can have that specialist training for your vulnerability champion, but also absolutely all staff need to have an understanding, of course, and particularly those customer facing staff need to have training on also interacting empathetically with vulnerable customers. So it's also the soft skills as well as the regulatory understanding. So for example, this could be through the creation of role play scenarios for staff to practice handling sort of emotional distress from, say, a grieving client, for example. So making sure that they're aware of how they should maybe be behaving in that situation. Again, that's better for the member of staff as well, that they're not sort of blindsided and caught off guard, so they know how to respond. Again, communication, pulling in the consumer duty, everything has to be clear and accessible. All of those communications have to be understandable, suitable again for the whole of the target audience, including those with vulnerable characteristics. So it could be adapting for use of bullet points, plain language, making sure that all of that information we share is understandable. Absolutely no jargon, get rid of it, make sure it is all very clear. Adapting our communication style to the customer's specific needs. Again, this should be for absolutely every customer, but thinking through the lens of our vulnerable clients. Offering multiple channels as well is something that some firms we're seeing sort of happening less. Again, we're getting things like chatbots, some of them with generative AI in play that can almost mimic a human conversation, sort of more on that happening, but sometimes they just cannot answer your question. So making sure that you're actually making it very easy to switch between those different forms of contract. And just from personal experience, a couple of weeks ago dealing with a firm, um, I couldn't find a way to contact them that wasn't the chatbot. I had to trowel through the website for about 20 minutes to find another way to contact them because the bot just couldn't answer the question that I needed it to. So ensuring again that there is that support available. And then finally, just from an operational point of view, again, saying what the FCA have seen as good practice in this space, a number of firms have been sort of centralising their vulnerability operations. So ensuring, again, we've sort of got those teams that can offer that sort of expert help for customers, that sort of export support. They've got more enhanced training. Again, that's only really for the bigger firms that have got the resource for it, but just mimicking that with that vulnerable champion. And then, of course, making sure that we are getting that adequate data and being able to flag when a customer has sort of enhanced needs. Again, as easy as putting that this customer needs to have larger text documentation. So again, they're just some examples. The results of that survey, looking at an analysis of the consumer duty over the 12 months since implementation, is available on the FCA website. It does also show you poor practice. If you are interested, it's actually a really interesting read. And they are doing, as I said, a full review on the duty scheduled for next year. Now, we've seen those key drivers for vulnerability. I just want to focus for a little while just on some of those types or forms of vulnerability that can fall within those drivers. And this is absolutely not everything. These are just some common scenarios, common circumstances that we may come across in the clients that we need to support, and thinking about how we should be tailoring our support and having the appropriate levels of sensitivity for these common scenarios, these considerations of what we should, how we should be supporting such individuals, some sort of practical steps. And not to go through all of these, but just picking a couple of those out. We've got things like financial hardship. Again, unfortunately, something that more and more people are finding themselves in, facing debt, struggling to pay bills, managing their limited finances. As I said, this is being exacerbated by the current cost of living, but thinking about how we could be supporting these clients. So from a broker perspective, uh, we are seeing a lot of people are either completely cancelling their policies because they can't afford them, we are seeing them sort of paring down their cover or doing things that they can to sort of make it more affordable, essentially make the premium cheaper, so more movement to premium finance, etc., things like that. So having to think about and consider when supporting this customer, could short-term changes like raising the excess quite significantly actually lead to long-term harm? Can they actually afford a higher excess? Do they understand the risks of that? What about if they actually had 2 or 3 claims in a year? They would have to pay that excess 3 times. Do they fully understand the implications of that? If they're paring down their cover, so removing some of that cover, reducing it, say they've got a home policy, they're taking accidental damage off, do they understand how that would impact any AD claim going forward? They wouldn't be able to make it. They would have to deal with that cost or have the responsibility for that cost themselves. So just having considerations like that and how we can support that customer. It's likely your firms are going to have policies around this. But another thing that we can do, which is just a best practice, is we can also signpost those individuals to support organisations. These are likely to be external. Some firms do have them internally. But one example is just Step Change. They are a free debt advice agency. And there's also, of course, mental health support services that can be referred to, as unfortunately there is correlation, of course, between financial hardship and increased stress and also poor mental health, unfortunately. So it could be sort of signposting to these areas that have specific individuals, specific websites that can actually help in their circumstances. Just pulling another one there, we've got things like age related. So that's of course thinking of our elderly clients, but also what about our younger clients? So 17 getting a motor insurance cover for the first time, very unlikely to understand the whole ins and outs of insurance. And this of course pulls in that financial literacy element, may not fully understand what the terms mean. So even terms like excess, not everybody understands what that means, particularly if they're new to insurance. So really thinking about how we explain key terms for clarity for these individuals. If there is a need for a power of attorney, say for example, of course, the elderly customers can sometimes correlate with things like dementia, making sure that power of attorneys we've got the information for those. We make sure we copy them in on communications. And as well, we can offer additional support. Just from my own personal experience, way back when, for a firm that I used to work for, we had a large number of elderly clients. A number of those, sadly, were very lonely, and you could tell that on the phone. Sometimes they would tell you the first person that spoken them to 4 days. So getting rid of those sort of productivity targets really helps with being able to actually give that person your time, let them have a conversation with you. But you can also offer them sort of additional support through referrals of other organisations. So things like Silverline, for example. There are other agencies, but they're effectively Childline for the elderly. They offer companionship. So you could be able to just tell that that individual that maybe you've got to get off the call now, but if they would like to they could contact this organisation. So, and of course, there are more around there. You may have a policy on who or what you can do regarding that, but that's just one thing, one way to actually be offering sort of better support to those particular clients. And again, just pulling out one of these, unfortunately, financial abuse, sometimes referred to as economic abuse. It is a form of domestic abuse, is linked to controlling or coercive relationships. That doesn't mean that it has to be between two partners. It can also be for somebody that is in a legal position for somebody else, or it can also be in a caring position, or even just members of different members of family. So when thinking about some specific considerations here to be better protecting and supporting these particular clients, we've got things like remembering data privacy. Of course, we should never forget it, but in this particular circumstances, never sharing contact details without proper authorization, and that's even if two people are named on the same policy. You have to be really vigilant. Abusers do call companies to obtain a fleeing partner's information, their location, for example. General rule of thumb, if that person wanted them to know where they were, they wouldn't have to call their insurance company to get their address. So you can escalate concerns about abuse as well for those sort of caring positions of power of attorney, if there's any indicators for this, or any sort of other legal third party, to the appropriate safeguarding authority. You've got things like adult social care, for example, and again, it's just coming at these situations with the right level of sort of sensitivity, but also making sure that we're not sort of blurring the line of involvement, particularly that is when it comes to that sort of financial abuse area. For example, some people may think that they could be being incredibly helpful, maybe sending somebody an email after a call saying, actually, there's companies like organisations like Refuge UK that could really help you here. If that's not done with the right level of discretion, is it crossing a line between that professional relationship? Providing details like that could actually get that person into an even more unsafe situation, because again, unfortunately, chances are their emails, their post is being looked into. So just making sure we're using that sort of right level of discretion as well as having that sensitivity. And that all sort of comes together on this with these points on your screen now. So those practical ways of better supporting our vulnerable clients. So of course it is through the realm of making sure they've got the right products, they're getting the right information, but it does go beyond this to make sure that we are actually ensuring we're giving the correct levels of support and also a quality customer service. So again, just looking at some of these practical tips, one of the best things we can do is always show and practice empathy, being sensitive to the customer's feeling, striving to understand their situation. You could say you've got a customer that's distressed about a claim, acknowledge their emotions, saying, I can see this has been a difficult time for you. Let's see how we can help. You can set call expectations, explain the call duration, the information needed up front to help the person feel more at ease. So literally just saying something like, this call is probably going to take us around 10-15 minutes. I'll need to ask you a few questions just to fully understand how I can assist you and get the right information from you to make sure you get the right product and service. One of the best things we can do for absolutely all of our clients as well is make sure that we're asking about their communication preferences. So this is just brilliant because it immediately sets how a person wants to be spoken to, whether it's by email, through letter, web chat, text, live chat, video conferencing, face to face, and also whilst asking, you can offer what it is you have available, so that can actually help that person again, enable them to make a disclosure. So explaining that we will follow up every phone call with an email written summary if that would be helpful for you, and then you can add that onto that person's file that this is something we should be doing for that particular customer. Another key one to pull out here is also that avoiding the please hold while I transfer you. Sometimes this is unavoidable. You've got to pass somebody to a different department or a different person. If they have, for example, told you they're going through a bereavement, say their partner has passed away, they need to amend the documents, they've come through to the wrong person, pass that information on to the person that you are passing them to. Make sure that they're aware. That means that person doesn't then have to repeat something that is already incredibly distressing and upsetting for them. The FCA really discourage that action for all customers, but particularly, again, looking through that lens of vulnerable clients. And finally there, being careful what you're recording when it comes to clients' vulnerability. Making sure you're not putting any unnecessary details, you're not labeling the customer, you're not absolutely not diagnosing the customer. That is not our role. Our role is to understand that we've got the relevant information to best support that customer's needs. And again, remembering absolutely that they can ask for a subject access request, which would reveal everything that we've put in their file anyway. And if they do not consider themselves to be a vulnerable client, again, that could be incredibly distressing for them. So, pulling that all together, the consumer duty and this focus on vulnerable clients, they are, of course, intrinsically linked. They sit together, they co-align, and they both emphasize the importance of delivering those good outcomes, treating all customers with due care and consideration. Of course, under the duty, firms are required to prioritize a customer's needs, ensuring their products and services are providing that value, they're understandable, and they're meeting an individual's circumstances and their needs, helping them to pursue those financial objectives and achieve those good outcomes. So firms need to make sure they're actively recognizing those signs of vulnerability, providing that tailored support to address specific needs, preventing that harm by ensuring that we've got clear communication, fair pricing, appropriate products and services, that we've not got any sludge practices that make it difficult to get a complaint or for a customer to contact us. For example, making sure that we have got all of that in play and we're looking through that lens of vulnerable clients, and making sure that we're focusing on those quality, those good customer outcomes being achieved by absolutely all of our customers. So the duty really reinforces a firm's obligation to prioritise those vulnerable clients, integrating their needs into all aspects of the customer journey, as we've said, from product design to communications to service delivery, pre, post, after sales, whilst they're joining you, whilst they're with you, and whilst they're leaving the firm, as it may be. So, moving on then to the Q&A, we've got a couple of minutes left for this. I haven't seen any questions come through yet. Please do send them through if you do have any. I'll just leave that box open if you do have any coming through. Okay, I'll keep my eye on that box just in case one does pop through. But what I'll do just in the meantime then is sort of wrap up. So if we don't get any, we can pop off the call and you can carry on with your afternoon. So thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's session, you will receive a survey on this presentation, and we would really appreciate it if you would complete that and provide us with your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. And on behalf of Allianz and Sing365, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you again next time. Take care. Goodbye.